In 1970, two of my heroes, Bob Marley and Lee Scratch Perry, would record a song called Soul Rebel. In that song, Bob would describe a world where we might all dare to challenge what we are told about us. Bob believed, and I believe too, that these so-called stories of resistance connect us with the power to be ourselves, the courage and the fighting spirit, even in the face of immense pressure to conform. Now, I was today years old when I first truly understood Bob's lyrics and actually felt the tension that Bob describes between his inner self and the political violence that must have been escalating around him at that time in Jamaica. Bob's stories, encapsulated in art and specifically in song, they speak of a need for us to resist in the moment, a kind of inner activism. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to call that soul rebellion. Like centuries of her ancestors, my mother was destined to be a cotton weaver, and my grandfather would do his best to stitch her up in that narrative. What's good enough for me is good enough for our Vicky. That's what he said to my mother when she achieved a full scholarship to go and study. And off she was sent back to the drudgery and the perils of factory life. It would take 20 years for my mother to finance that high school study. And she would do it standing in a checkout in Safeway, despite the fact she'd already earned it. And it would take her 4 more years to earn a law degree. And my father, he arrived on Ash Wednesday and into the eye of an extreme weather event right here. Wildfires were raging terror as he arrived, with every winter coat that he owned layered on his strong back. Taking a leap of faith into a new life, that wasn't new to my father, not at all. Neither were the overseers in immigration, who, perhaps emblazoned by years of white Australia policy, rubbed their hands together and detained him for hours and insisted on examining every inch of everything that he carried. To my father's delight, that would include a jar of pickled Scotch bonnet peppers, some of the hottest chilies on earth. And he would look on. The land was burning, he was sweating. Why not let those officials sweat along with us? Sometimes the most rebellious thing we can do is to dare to know that we're enough. My parents' quiet defiance of their own narratives embodies soul rebellion. I grew up on those stories of resistance that my parents brought with them to Lucky Country, of cotton unions, of protesting signs that said no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. As told by Marcus Garvey in Nanny of the Maroons. As told by Judy Mowat, Burning Spear and Linton Kwesi Johnson. Now, I'm not sure if I can articulate exactly when I became separated from those stories. But somehow at an early age, growing up not far from here, I began to suffer. I suffered as a child when I was punished by teachers for appearing above my station or too precocious. And I suffered when I was assaulted by other children and their parents explained that behaviour away. I suffered as a teen when, for reasons invisible to me, it was deemed that I must somehow be easy. And sometimes by grown-ass adults. I internalized many painful experiences growing up not far from here. And entering into the workplace, this kind of turned into a storm of dismissiveness, bullying, social exclusion. We know these words, right? And worst of all, a showering of praise, always for conforming. And unbeknownst to me, I would live a huge part of my life grieving the loss of somebody else, the person who was enough. Thankfully, as an artist, I've always made work to make sense of myself. And at times, as my hero Jamaica Kincaid says, I have written to save my life. A CEO is assumed to be a leader, but to me, leadership is just the act of defining yourself. And I am the product of two people from vastly different backgrounds who dared to define themselves outside the expectations of empire. So as I try to step into the shoes of whatever an arts leader is supposed to be, I can't help but wonder if some of me was left at immigration. Why is the journey of leadership sold to us in ways that assume we must abandon our truths, our culture, and fit into a set of attributes? Why are we told that this is success? Imagine if all the time I spent trying to fit in, changing to fit in, holding my tongue, agreeing with idiots, skipping meals, believing, in the words of Sonia Renee Taylor, that somehow my body is an apology. What if instead I've been drawing strength from great stories of rebellion? What if my knowledge of Marcus Garvey had been complemented by stories of Truganini, Malpahina, and Dr. Gary Foley, and if the resistance that I needed was already embodied in me in the activism of Alice Walker, A. Lee Morton Robinson, Zora Neale Hurston, and Chelsea Bottego? What if you had known how to resist the narratives you were sold about you? What could you gain through the rebellion of your own soul? Artists, fellow artists, we must resist the urge to define ourselves in the language of industry. We're not just here for the entertainment of others. In the words of artist Monica Lim, that is economy, darling, not ecology. Defining our value in this way, it's just one more continuous loop of deficit. You are a soul adventurer. Don't let others adventure on your soul. It was storytelling alone that first helped me take all the rage that I felt and gather it into a language of purpose. Stories gave me the tool to weave something into existence, something that might even be beautiful. A love letter to a young person or a playbook, should you encounter the same problems that I did. Leaders, we need to do better than this current flattening out of perspective, of individuality and of culture. No one's happy, be honest. We're responsible for creating environments where people can authentically be themselves. We're responsible for supporting people who dare to define themselves outside the auspices of industry and the narrow narratives that gives us. And we're responsible for our own growth, which means listening, learning, and occasionally getting a little bit butthurt. We're responsible for our own inner expansion and accountable for making room for other people's stories alongside our own. We don't need any more people to grow up on a diet of all the ways. They are not enough. Soul rebels, my fellow soul rebels, I want to pass on this gift to you too, of connecting with untold stories of survival, strength, and rebellion. Sharing and melding our treasured cultural stories of heroes, rebels. That's the key to us galvanizing a shared history, just as my parents did. And yes, in a sexy way, just 44 years ago. We can look right under our feet for the knowledge to resist the tropes that are put on us, and the strength to define ourselves. There are people right here in this earth who resisted by taking control of their own narratives. Are you qualified to live among them? I understand now what Bob was saying. He's saying, if waking up to the richness of culture everywhere on this land doesn't put fire in you, maybe it's because you need to start asking yourself some difficult questions. We all need to start holding ourselves devastatingly accountable to the narratives that we continue. Now, the custodians of the world's oldest continuous culture, they're like the original OGs, right, of Soul Rebellion. And we are truly lucky to be on a continent so radically loved and cared for. And their big idea, that big idea, daring to honour people, communities, stories, the land above all else. Now that could really change everything when it finally catches on.